When Douglas MacArthur learned that George Patton was dead, he said something so raw, so brutally honest that the officers who heard it were stunned into silence, and blood ran cold. It wasn't the polished tribute the newspapers printed. It was something far darker, far more revealing about what it means to be a warrior in a world that no longer needs warriors. What MacArthur really said that December morning exposed a truth most people never consider. General Douglas MacArthur, Supreme Commander for the Allied Powers, the strategist who conquered the Pacific, who orchestrated Japan's surrender, sits alone in his office reviewing occupation directives. The war ended 4 months ago. Hitler's Reich lies in ruins. The Empire of Japan kneels under his authority. He has survived everything war could devise, but he's about to receive news that will shake him in ways combat never did. Hello, my dear family. If this story has found you today, I kindly ask you to subscribe to my channel. It may only take a second, but it supports me more than you know. Share your location in the comments so we can connect across the world. Now, take a deep breath, relax, and enjoy this special story. An aide enters carrying an urgent telegram from Europe. The paper trembles slightly in the young officer's hand. MacArthur takes it, begins reading. His expression, normally as rigid as granite, shifts. Something flashes across his face. Recognition, disbelief, perhaps grief. General George S. Patton, Jr. is dead. MacArthur reads the details slowly. Patton died that morning in Heidelberg, Germany, 5:50 p.m. local time, 12 days after a car accident on a country road. Paralyzed from the neck down, gone at 60 years old. The general who survived 2 world wars, who led armies across 3 continents, who terrified enemy commanders from North Africa to the Rhine, killed not by enemy fire, but by a Sunday morning traffic accident. MacArthur dismisses his aide, asks to be left alone. For several minutes, according to staff officers present that day, America's supreme commander in the Pacific sits in absolute silence, staring at the telegram. Outside, Tokyo stirs under hers occupation. Inside, MacArthur contemplates the death of a man he barely knew but deeply understood. Because Douglas MacArthur and George Patton were never friends, they served oceans apart during the war. They exchanged few letters, met rarely. Their careers ran parallel but separate, MacArthur commanding the Pacific Theater, Patton driving through Europe. Yet in that Tokyo office, reading of Patton's death, MacArthur felt something profound. He recognized in Patton what he saw in himself, a warrior born for battle, shaped by conflict, uncomfortable in peace. 2 men who believed they were destined for glory on epic battlefields. 2 generals who survived the greatest war in human history only to face their greatest challenge afterward, surviving peace itself. MacArthur finally calls his staff back. He begins drafting an official statement for the press. The words are formal, measured, appropriate for public consumption. The death of General Patton is a great loss to the Army and to the nation. But before settling on that polished tribute, according to those present, MacArthur said something else. Something raw, something that revealed how he truly saw Patton's death and perhaps feared his own future. He said that men like Patton were born for war, not peace, that warriors of Patton's caliber struggle when the guns fall silent, that it was tragic, cruelly tragic, for such a man to die not in battle, but on a quiet road in defeated Germany. These private words never made the newspapers. They shocked the few officers who heard them, not because they insulted Patton, but because of their brutal, poetic truth. They revealed what MacArthur really believed, that Patton's accidental death wasn't random tragedy, but something darker, the inevitable fate of a pure warrior trapped in a world that no longer needed him. This is the story of what MacArthur said when Patton died, the official statement the world read, the private words that revealed MacArthur's deepest understanding of military greatness and its terrible price, and what MacArthur's reaction revealed about both generals, 2 titans forged in fire, both struggling with the unbearable weight of peace. To understand why Patton's death struck MacArthur so deeply, we need to go back to the beginning, to two boys born 5 years apart, raised on opposite sides of America, both destined for the same brutal profession. Douglas MacArthur entered the world in 1880 on an Army frontier post in Little Rock, Arkansas. His father, Arthur MacArthur, Jr., was a Civil War hero who'd earned the Medal of Honor charging Confederate positions at Missionary Ridge. Young Douglas grew up in the shadow of that achievement, listening to war stories, watching his father command troops, absorbing the belief that military service was the highest calling. George Patton was born 5 years later in 1885 on a California ranch. His family worshipped Confederate tradition. His grandfather had been a colonel who died fighting for the South. The Pattons raised George on tales of ancient warriors, Alexander the Great, Hannibal, Napoleon. They taught him that combat was noble, that dying gloriously in battle was the ultimate honor. Both boys grew up believing the same thing. War was their destiny. MacArthur attended West Point in 1903. He dominated, graduated first in his class with the highest academic record in 25 years. Brilliant, polished, destined for command from the moment he arrived. Patton entered West Point in 1904. He struggled, failed mathematics his first year, had to repeat. But what he lacked in academics, he made up for in physical prowess and sheer obsessive determination. He wasn't studying to be a soldier, he was training to become a warrior king from antiquity. Their paths first crossed in France during World War I. MacArthur commanded the 42nd Rainbow Division. Patton commanded tank units. According to military records, they met at least once during the war. The encounter was brief, but each man recognized something in the other: ferocity, ambition, absolute confidence. They were too similar to be friends, too competitive to collaborate. But they noticed each other. After the war, their careers continued on parallel tracks: rising officers in a peacetime army, ambitious men in a shrinking military, both restless, both waiting for the next war that would give them purpose. Then came July 1932, Washington, D.C. The Bonus Army Incident. Thousands of World War I veterans camped in Washington, demanding early payment of bonuses promised by Congress. President Herbert Hoover ordered the Army to clear them out. Douglas MacArthur, now Army Chief of Staff, commanded the operation. George Patton, now a major, led cavalry and tank units executing MacArthur's orders. This was the moment the two men truly saw each other. MacArthur orchestrated from above, calm, calculating, using overwhelming force to disperse American veterans. He believed in order, in authority, in the necessity of following commands even when uncomfortable. Patton executed on horseback, leading cavalry charges against men he'd fought beside 15 years earlier. He was visibly troubled by the assignment, but followed orders without question. To Patton, duty meant action, even distasteful action. The incident defined their difference. MacArthur was authority itself. Patton was the instrument of violence authority wielded. After 1932, their paths diverged completely. MacArthur went to the Philippines to build an army. Patton remained stateside, developing armored warfare doctrine. Then came World War II. MacArthur fought across the Pacific, island hopping from Australia to the Philippines to Tokyo. His warfare was strategic, symbolic, political. He stage-managed his own image, waited ashore at Leyte with photographers capturing every step. He understood that modern war required not just battlefield victory, but public theater. Patton stormed across North Africa, Sicily, France, and Germany. His warfare was pure kinetic fury, speed, aggression, relentless forward motion. He slapped soldiers, cursed at generals, made enemies of politicians. He didn't care about public relations. He cared about killing enemy forces and winning battles. They served oceans apart, communicated rarely, if at all. Yet each followed the other's campaigns through newspapers and military reports. Each measured himself against the other's growing legend. MacArthur read about Patton's blitzkrieg across France and recognized a kindred spirit who valued bold action over caution. Patton heard about MacArthur's return to the Philippines and recognized someone who understood the symbolic power of military achievement. They shared core traits: supreme confidence, enormous egos, contempt for hesitation. Both believed they were destined for greatness. Both cultivated distinctive public images, MacArthur with his corncob pipe and sunglasses, Patton with his ivory-handled pistols and profane speeches. But they differed fundamentally in approach. MacArthur was the political general, a strategist who understood that winning wars required managing personalities, navigating Washington politics, balancing military objectives with diplomatic realities. Patton was the pure warrior, an instrument of destruction who believed war should be fought with maximum aggression until the enemy was annihilated. MacArthur orchestrated, Patton executed. They were two sides of the same warrior coin. And that's why MacArthur's reaction to Patton's death would be so deeply personal. Not because they were friends, they weren't. Not because they'd served together closely, they hadn't. But because they were reflections of each other. Two men born for battle, two generals who'd survived the greatest war in human history. Two warriors now facing the same terrible question: what happens to men built for war when peace arrives? December 21st, 1945. 9:30 a.m. Tokyo time. Douglas MacArthur sits alone in his office on the 6th floor of the Dai-ichi Insurance Building. The telegram lies on his desk. Outside, Pacific wind rattles the windows. Below, occupied Tokyo moves through another morning under American authority. Inside, silence. MacArthur doesn't move, doesn't call for his aide, doesn't reach for the telephone. He simply sits, staring at the words that refuse to make sense. General George S. Patton, Jr. is dead. In the hallway outside, staff officers wait. They whisper to each other. Something monumental has occurred. The Supreme Commander dismissed everyone, asked to be alone. That never happens. Inside the office, MacArthur's mind races through decades of memory. He thinks of Patton's brilliance, the speed, the audacity, the relentless forward momentum that terrified German commanders. He thinks of their few interactions over 30 years, brief encounters, formal exchanges, never friendship, but always mutual recognition. He feels something unexpected, regret. Regret that two men so similar never truly connected, that pride and distance and separate theaters kept them apart. But mostly, he feels cosmic unfairness. George Patton survived Pancho Villa's Mexico, survived World War I trenches, survived Rommel's desert, survived Sicily's invasion, survived the Bulge's frozen hell, survived the drive into Nazi Germany. 30 years of warfare, countless bullets fired in his direction, artillery shells exploding around him, enemy snipers hunting him, and he died in a car accident on a quiet Sunday morning. Not by sword, not by bullet, by traffic collision. It feels wrong, obscene. A warrior of Patton's caliber deserved to fall in combat, leading one final charge, dying gloriously as ancient generals died. Instead, this, paralyzed in a hospital bed, helpless, broken by peace. MacArthur finally stands, calls for his staff. They enter quickly, relieved he's ready to speak. "I need to draft a statement," MacArthur says, "for the press." He begins dictating. The words come slowly, carefully chosen. The death of General Patton is a great loss to the Army and to the nation. He was one of the most brilliant soldiers America has produced. His daring and resourcefulness were matched by his tactical skill and strategic vision. He was a great captain who will take his place in history with the finest field commanders of all time. The aide transcribes quickly. Perfect, formal, appropriate for public consumption. But before the aide can leave, MacArthur speaks again. This time his voice is different, quieter, more personal. According to Colonel Sidney Huff, who was present that morning, MacArthur said something else, something that never made it into official records. "Patton was born for battle, not peace," MacArthur said, almost to himself. "Men like him die when the guns fall silent." The officers in the room exchanged glances. This wasn't the polished tribute meant for newspapers. MacArthur continued, staring out the window toward the distant Pacific. Peace is a battlefield men like Patton could never conquer. The words hung in the air, brutal, poetic, shocking in their honesty. MacArthur believed deeply, spiritually, that certain men possessed a connection to warfare that went beyond profession. Warriors weren't made by training alone. They were born with something ancient inside them, a hunger for battle, a need for conflict that peacetime could never satisfy. He believed fate placed men exactly where they belonged. Patton belonged on battlefields, leading cavalry charges, commanding tank divisions, driving forward through enemy fire. Patton didn't belong in peacetime Germany, managing administrative duties, giving diplomatic speeches, navigating occupation politics. And MacArthur saw Patton's final months clearly. The controversial statements about former enemies, the relief from Third Army Command, the bitter diary entries complaining about unappreciation. Patton had been restless, frustrated, diminished, the warrior trapped in peace. To MacArthur, Patton's accidental death wasn't random tragedy. It was inevitable. Men built for war cannot survive peace. The accident on that Mannheim road was simply fate correcting an imbalance, removing a warrior from a world that no longer needed warriors. But MacArthur couldn't say that publicly. Political pressures demanded decorum. Washington expected appropriate tributes, not philosophical observations about warriors and destiny. The American public wanted to mourn a hero, not hear that their hero was fundamentally incompatible with peace. MacArthur edited himself, produced the polished statement, buried the raw truth. But those private words revealed something deeper than his view of Patton. They revealed MacArthur's fear about himself. Because if Patton couldn't survive peace, if warriors truly die when guns fall silent, what did that mean for Douglas MacArthur? He was 65 years old, ruling occupied Japan, managing Reconstruction instead of fighting battles, playing diplomat instead of commanding assaults. Was he also becoming obsolete, a relic of wartime in a world moving toward peace? Would he, too, face Patton's fate, struggling, diminishing, dying not in glory, but in irrelevance? MacArthur looked at the telegram one final time before his aide took it away. General George S. Patton, Jr. was dead. And in mourning Patton, MacArthur confronted his own greatest fear, that warriors who survive war might not survive what comes after. In the hours after receiving news of Patton's death, MacArthur found himself remembering Patton's wars, not the official reports or strategic summaries, but the visceral reality of what Patton had accomplished. North Africa, 1943, Patton, taking command of demoralized American forces after their humiliation at Kasserine Pass. Within weeks, he'd transformed them into a fighting force that drove Rommel's Afrika Korps back across Tunisia. Speed, aggression, relentless pressure. Patton didn't just defeat the Desert Fox. He out-Rommeled Rommel, using the Germans' own tactics against him. Sicily. Summer 1943. Patton racing British General Montgomery to Messina, turning the invasion into a competition. His tanks roared across the island in just 38 days. Critics called it glory hunting. Patton called it winning. Normandy, August 1944. Patton's Third Army breaking out from the beachhead, slicing through German defenses like a blade through paper. In 1 month, his forces advanced farther and faster than any army in military history. 400 miles in 30 days. The Germans couldn't retreat fast enough. Bastogne, December 1944. The 101st Airborne surrounded, freezing, running out of ammunition. Eisenhower asked if Patton could relieve them. Patton pivoted his entire army 90 degrees in 48 hours, a maneuver military experts said was impossible, and smashed through German lines to save the trapped paratroopers. Germany. Spring 1945, the final drive into the Third Reich. Patton's tanks crossing the Rhine, capturing 11,000 square miles of enemy territory, liberating concentration camps, pushing toward Berlin until Eisenhower ordered him to stop. MacArthur had followed every campaign through reports and newspapers. He recognized Patton's genius, the instinctive understanding of momentum, the ability to sense enemy weakness and exploit it instantly. And MacArthur contrasted Patton's wars with his own. Bataan, 1942. MacArthur forced to abandon his troops to Japanese forces, escaping to Australia while his men surrendered and died. The shame of that retreat never left him. Leyte, October 1944. MacArthur waiting ashore in the Philippines, fulfilling his promise to return. Redemption earned through brutal island-hopping campaigns across the Pacific, and MacArthur could already foresee his future. Korea, perhaps. Another war, another opportunity to prove himself. He was 65, but not finished. Not yet. The comparison wasn't competitive. MacArthur didn't measure himself against Patton to determine who was superior. It was philosophical. Two different types of greatness, two different approaches to the same profession. Patton fought wars of movement and annihilation. MacArthur fought wars of strategy and symbolism. Both succeeded brilliantly. Both also carried crushing burdens. MacArthur understood what few civilians appreciated, the enormous expectations placed on generals. The nation demanded victory without excuses. Politicians demanded results without excessive casualties. The press demanded heroism without controversy. Patton lived under those same pressures, every decision scrutinized, every casualty questioned, every success expected. Both men faced constant public controversy. MacArthur's disputes with civilian leadership were legendary. His conflicts with Washington over Pacific strategy, his resistance to orders he considered militarily unsound. Patton's controversies were worse. The soldier-slapping incidents in Sicily nearly ended his career. His statements comparing Nazi Party membership to American political parties created international outrage. His inability to control his tongue made him a constant liability. Both endured intense pressure from political leaders who didn't understand warfare. Roosevelt second-guessing MacArthur's Pacific strategy. Eisenhower constantly managing Patton's explosive temperament. And both experienced profound isolation at the top. Command meant loneliness. Decisions made alone. Responsibility carried alone. No peers to confide in, only subordinates who couldn't truly understand. MacArthur saw all this clearly now. He and Patton had walked parallel paths through the same brutal landscape of military leadership. But MacArthur also recognized a fundamental difference. Patton represented something pure, the unfiltered warrior ethos. Combat was his religion. Victory was his only goal. He didn't care about politics, diplomacy, or post-war planning. He cared about destroying enemy forces. MacArthur represented something more complex. The warrior and statesman fused together. He understood that modern generals must be politicians, diplomats, and public relations experts as well as combat commanders. Patton couldn't make that transition, wouldn't make it. His purity was both his strength and his fatal weakness. And sitting in his Tokyo office, MacArthur felt something unexpected, a sense that an era was ending. The age of warrior generals like Patton, pure fighters uncomplicated by political considerations, was dying with him. Future wars would require different generals, men who understood atomic weapons and international relations, men who could navigate Washington bureaucracy as skillfully as they maneuvered armies. The world no longer had room for men like Patton. Perhaps it barely had room for men like MacArthur. That realization carried weight. MacArthur was older than Patton. If Patton couldn't survive peace, what hope did MacArthur have? But MacArthur also felt something darker, something he wouldn't admit even to himself. Envy. Patton's story ended at its peak. Yes, he died tragically. Yes, the accident was cruel and unfair, but Patton would never experience decline, never face forced retirement, never watch younger generals dismiss his ideas as outdated, never endure the slow fade into irrelevance that awaits all warriors who survive too long. Patton died while still legendary, still feared by enemies, still respected by soldiers. His legacy was secure. MacArthur couldn't say the same. He still had battles to fight, decisions to make, opportunities to fail. His story wasn't finished, and unfinished stories could still end badly. Patton escaped that fate. His death preserved his legend intact. MacArthur stood at his window, looking out over Tokyo, and wondered, would history remember him as kindly? MacArthur's official statement reached newspapers across America by December 22nd. The death of General Patton is a great loss to the Army and to the nation. He was one of the most brilliant soldiers America has produced. The words appeared in every major paper: the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Chicago Tribune. From coast to coast, Americans read MacArthur's tribute and mourned. In Europe, soldiers who'd served under Patton wept openly. Grown men who'd stormed beaches and survived artillery barrages cried like children when they heard their general was gone. Third Army veterans gathered in makeshift memorials, sharing stories, struggling to accept that old blood, and Guts was dead. Newspapers debated the meaning of Patton's death. Editorial pages wrestled with the cruel irony. Some called it fate, that even great warriors cannot escape destiny. Others called it robbery, peace, stealing what war could not claim. The nation grieved for the general who had helped win the greatest war in history, only to die on a quiet road 8 months after victory. But MacArthur's public statement told only part of his truth. Behind closed doors in Tokyo, MacArthur said things his staff would remember for decades. According to multiple officers present during those December days, MacArthur couldn't stop talking about Patton, not in official capacity, but in private moments when the Supreme Commander's guard dropped. Colonel Sidney Huff recalled MacArthur saying Patton should have died with his boots on, the old cavalry expression for dying in combat, that a warrior of Patton's caliber deserved to fall leading a charge, sword in hand, in the heat of battle. Major Fabian Bowers remembered MacArthur comparing Patton to ancient commanders. "He belongs in the pantheon with Alexander and Caesar," MacArthur allegedly said, "men born for conquest, uncomfortable anywhere but on battlefields." But the words that shocked everyone who heard them came late one evening, according to multiple accounts. MacArthur stood at his office window, looking out over darkened Tokyo. He'd been silent for several minutes. Then he murmured, almost to himself, "Peace killed him, not war." The officers present exchanged stunned glances. The statement was brutal, poetic, unsettling in its honesty, because MacArthur wasn't criticizing Patton. He was revealing a truth about warriors that civilians rarely understand. Some men are built for war. It's not just their profession, it's their purpose. Combat gives them meaning that peace cannot provide. The clarity of battle, the decisive action, the opportunity to prove courage and skill, these things feed something deep in a warrior's soul. Patton was such a man. He came alive on battlefields. He thrived in chaos. He found purpose in leading soldiers against enemy forces. But in peace, that same warrior spirit had nowhere to go. The energy that drove him across France had to be channeled into administrative duties, diplomatic meetings, occupation politics, tasks that suffocated him. MacArthur understood this completely. He saw Patton's final months, the controversial statements, the relief from command, the bitterness and frustration. Patton hadn't adjusted to peace, couldn't adjust. His nature wouldn't allow it. The car accident was tragic, but to MacArthur, Patton's struggle in peacetime was equally tragic. A caged lion dying slowly from confinement, or a caged lion dying quickly from accident. Either way, the lion wasn't meant for the cage. MacArthur's private words revealed his inner philosophy of military greatness. He believed warriors possessed something almost spiritual, a connection to combat that transcended mere skill or training. Great generals weren't just made by academies and experience. They were born with warrior souls, and he believed those souls belonged on battlefields, not in peacetime bureaucracies. Patton's death symbolized the tragedy of all warriors trapped in peace. Men built for one purpose, forced to exist in circumstances that denied that purpose. The world heard MacArthur's polished tribute, but the handful of officers who heard his private remarks understood something deeper. MacArthur wasn't just mourning Patton. He was confronting his own fate. Because if peace killed Patton, what would it do to MacArthur? December 24th, 1945. Dawn in Tokyo. MacArthur stood at his office window as pale light spread across the city. The telegram announcing Patton's death still sat on his desk 3 days later. He hadn't filed it away, couldn't bring himself to. The funeral was happening now in Luxembourg. MacArthur calculated the time difference. 6:30 a.m. in Tokyo meant 1:30 p.m. in Luxembourg. Just before the Christmas Eve burial. He imagined the scene, snow falling on white crosses, soldiers in formation, Patton's flag-draped casket being lowered into frozen ground beside the men he had commanded. MacArthur whispered to the empty room, "Farewell, George. The battlefield was your kingdom." No one heard those final words. No aide recorded them. But they captured everything MacArthur felt about Patton's life and death. The irony remained overwhelming. Patton survived Pancho Villa's bullets, survived World War I trenches, survived Rommel's hunters, survived Sicily, Normandy, Bastogne, and the drive into Germany. He survived the world's deadliest battlefields across 3 decades. But a single act of compassion, moving to the back seat so a freezing dog could be warm, set in motion the events that killed him. War couldn't claim George Patton. Peace did. MacArthur understood that irony more deeply than anyone. He understood because he saw himself in Patton. 2 warriors, 2 men built for battle, 2 generals now navigating a world that no longer needed their particular talents. What MacArthur said when Patton died, both publicly and privately, revealed not just his view of Patton, but his understanding of himself. The polished statement spoke to history and the American public. The private words spoke to truth and fate. And standing in his Tokyo office that December morning, Douglas MacArthur knew that one day someone would ask what his own life meant. Whether he, too, was simply a warrior who survived the war but couldn't survive what came after. The question would haunt him for years. But on that December dawn, he simply stood at his window and mourned the man who never had to answer it.